it's wonderful to see you all here this evening. I hope that you feel the same. And there is an abundance of amazing and incredible creative force here in this room. I've gone through the list today, and I was just looking into everyone's research creation and what they have been doing. And I've really been looking forward to this. It's actually going to be quite something spectacular. And also, I was just constantly always thinking, what is research creation? It's one of those buzzwords that we always use all the time, you know, like hub or cluster or research creation. And they said, what's your spiel going to be? Well, my spiel in regards to research creation has to do with dealing with people who have experienced episodic or chronic homelessness, and then working through imagination to find different ways of dealing with disaffiliation. And what has allowed me to do that has been a student here, a master's student in sculpture here at Concordia, but I also did a bachelor's in philosophy here, and I also did my bachelor's of fine arts here as well. And what has prepared me for this research creation has been some of the people that are sitting in this room who have been my teachers, and also the people that have inspired me. And most recently, I've come across this, again, this old, new idea of social sculpture that was first put together by, or put forward by Joseph Beuys. And as I was thinking about this research creation, I thought of Joseph Beuys, and I thought of my own practice and how, what is it exactly that I'm trying to create? What is it exactly that we are trying to create as a collective, as a university? And how is it that we really want to better or have the betterment of society a possibility? Unfortunately, Rebecca Duclos, our fantastic fine arts dean, couldn't be here this evening, but we're joined with other incredible VIPs which are in attendance, with is Anna Capoduro, which is the Associate Dean of Planning and Academic Facilities. We have Joanna Berezowska, who is also one of our presenters this evening. Dominique Dumont, who is our representative from Facilities Management. Thank you so much for coming. And also, we have an extra special guest of Donald Schmidt, who is the architect himself from the Diamond Schmidt firm, who won the contract to help us with our space plan. Right. So you're the hero at the moment. that might change later on, but no, let's stay hopeful. Let's stay hopeful. All right. So the way that this is going to work, I have this amazing piece of technology in my right hand. I am going to hand it to you, and then if you push. Okay, so if you put, no, if it's my right, your left, and then if you just push, and then it'll go forward. If not, it just goes backward. So then just push forward. Okay? So you have 4 minutes to deliver this abundance of research that's taken you an entire lifetime to accumulate. I will give you a sign when you've reached the 1 minute warning. Okay? So this will be the sign for the 1 minute warning. When you've said too much or you've passed, this will be the sign. Okay? And if I disagree with what you're saying, I will touch my right ear repeatedly, followed by perhaps an eyebrow. I'm not sure. We're still working on that one. Okay? So it is my honor to present Kathleen Vaughn as our first speaker for the evening.
Started?
No.
Okay.
Not yet.
I don't want to cheat on my time, but I will. So I'm not going to tell you my whole in 4 minutes. I'm going to focus on one piece with specific reference to the space issues around creating it. This is a piece of mine called Walk in the Water, Marcher sur les eaux. I create textile maps at this point in my practice, although I work across multiple media, photography, video, audio. And this particular project is a map of Point St. Charles and the changing shoreline over the past 200 years, how the city has repeatedly infilled the shoreline with contaminated earth, making this part of now the point inhabitable and removing the citizens from access to water. So this is a piece that explores questions of environmental and social justice through visual and textile media, but there are also touch-sensitive points that play back audio interviews of different people who have some kind of vested interest with the river, either experts in climate change, local activists. There's even the voice of the river itself recorded through hydrophone. So this work is large. It's 9 feet by 12, and it's currently at the Webster Library until next Monday afternoon, if you have a chance to go and see it and interact with it. So I was fortunate to have use of studio space in the Faubourg building for 18 months, where I worked with materials spread out a lot, with students helping me. A lot of my work needs situational space, room to move. We also then moved to Milieu, where I'm a member of the Textiles and Materiality Cluster, where we also were building, hanging, room to move, to create the rigging and put together the various layers of the structure. With the students who've been working with me, you can get a sense of the scale of the piece. And also the particular expertise. But thanks to Milieu, I was able to have access to the embroidery facilities there that allowed for conductive thread to carry the current, that allowed the circuits to be created that would allow the playback of audio from speakers hidden behind the top layer of the map. And so the two people here are working, putting together the technology, the wave trigger that houses the audio that's part of this piece. So I think for me and my students, I'm faculty in art education. We love to be able to get our hands into material, get our hands dirty. The students in my department have occasional use of a mixed use room that's kind of like this, but not a wet room and not a dirty room. There's going to be a projector installed. There's been some discussion in our department that our students would enjoy having shared studio space with indie students, with HUMA students perhaps, with art therapy students, just someplace to really get dirty and make work that they don't have facilities for, and that I have been fortunate enough to kind of perch through the university in various places as the particular phase of my projects require. That's it.
That was incredible, and you saved us some time, so
Great.
I'd like to tell you a little story about my family. We're just going to go on to our next presenter, Dave LaRue.
You may not know this about Eduardo's brother, but he's a minister, and I found myself at his brother's church one Sunday, and he told us a story about his family. Quite the family. So my name's Dave. I'm a third-year MFA student, and research creation. To sort of answer the question of what research creation is, I think would garner as many answers as there are people in the room. I developed this sort of drawing here that if this big circle is research creation, it didn't turn out well on the projector, but I think of research creation as this ecosystem that puts the subject in the middle and has all of these things at the periphery. This would be research, this would be writing, this would be travel, this would be painting and drawing. And for me, all of these things sort of work together to push my practice forward. I know research creation is often seen as a series of buzzwords to get artists tri-council money, but I think of it more as a lifestyle choice. So I'm going to take you through one portion of my research creation. This is from my BFA final exhibition at Concordia University in 2014. During the time, I was exploring sport as it relates to culture. And I'm from a sports-loving town in rural Nova Scotia, so just thinking more about, how sport is this community gathering, social aspect thing, and where does it fit in with the ways that we think about each other and the ways that we think about our cultivated communal identities. But I painted this painting, a one-off painting to the right, featuring the 2012 London Olympic opening ceremonies. And that painting became incredibly important later because we had Brexit. And Brexit, of course, was this troubling event because imagery like this was circulating, putting non-white faces in the landscape, right? UKIP was really playing on these fears of these breaking points, right? And I got to thinking about the myths of national identity that were going on in the 2012 opening ceremonies. And so revisiting that other painting, which I had painted in 2014, thinking about the ways that national mythology was played out within the London Olympics and reimagining it post-Brexit. So this has been my current body of work, rethinking not just sport and identity, and sorry, I feel like I'm tailing off, but actually thinking about how landscape is used as this way of perpetuating certain social things. Where was I? Yeah, and just thinking about how landscape is often leveraged for political ends. So I forgot to actually put any new paintings in here, but looking ahead, I'm thinking about now how we live in these politically turbulent times and how there's a lot of questions right now surrounding our neighbors to the south and the future of Brexit, and there's rising populism. And most of my research at the moment is thinking about how landscape is actually used as a perpetuator of this of populism by demagogues, basically. And you think about the terminology like America's heartland or coal country, or with Brexit, thinking about what's a real Brit, right? And these questions always seem to, if not go back directly to landscape, touch on landscape in some sort of way as a way of perpetuating national mythologies. So looking ahead, I'm looking at Tokyo 2020 and Qatar 2022 as these other national events to examine in the lead up to and perhaps expand upon after. So thank you.
Great. Though my brother is a minister, I need to now publicly state that I'm agnostic. Just to put that out there. All right. I'd like to welcome Jessica Carmichael.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm full-time faculty in the theater department. And I'm going to tell you about 4 works of theater and a little story about each, and I'm going to read a little bit if that's indulge me. And I'm really bad with this kind of stuff. Here we go. IdeaLab was a dramaturgy and directing project that I initiated in collaboration with Toronto's award-winning immersive theater company Outside the March and community partners Rodman Hall Arts Centre and the 6th grade students of Harriet Tubman Public School in St. Catharines, Ontario. Rodman Hall and its grounds were animated with the creation of a site-specific immersive theater experience created by the youth of Niagara. iChild was an exploration of our heavily digitized, mediated, screen-filled world created by a demographic that had known nothing but. Questions that drove the devised process were, how does technology affect children at home, in the school? How has technology advancement changed language arts for children? How has technology created gaps in how children experience land and heritage? How do we create art? We chose Rodman Hall to investigate the cross-section between technology, language, heritage space, and contemporary art and their place in children's lives. The performance was written by the students and performed by the actors of the Shaw Festival Theatre over 4 workshop presentations. The setting, just quickly, Rodman Hall, this is written by them, is the headquarters for the Department of Accessible Information. The grounds at Rodman Hall is the last refuge for nature without technology. Every day there's a natural disaster. Every day another animal or tree dies. Every 20 minutes the season changes. There's barely any nature left. People have been disappearing. People have been implanted with a microchip to connect them to motherhood. Ipperwash, which premiered in summer 2017, was a new play created by myself and playwright Phelan Johnson. The Blythe Festival commissioned us to work together to tell a story about the land dispute between the people of Stoney and Kettle Point and the government of Canada. This dispute has been dated back to after the War of 1812, when the Crown granted lands along Lake Huron to the Chippewas of Kettle and Stony Point for their service after the war. By 1929, much of the beachfront property of Kettle and Stony Point was sold off by the Indian agent without permission from the communities. In 1942, under the War Measures Act, the National Department of Defense expropriated 2,400 acres of Stony Point people's territory. Families were moved to nearby Kettle Point. This move allowed for the creation of Camp Ipperwash, a training base for Canadian soldiers. The land was promised to be returned to the people of Stony Point after World War II. It took over 70 years for that promise to be fulfilled. Part verbatim, part fiction, the piece was written over a year and a half. Phelan and I began visiting the people of Stony Point in February of 2016. Myself as an Abenaki Euro artist and Phelan as a Tuscarora Mohawk artist, neither of which were from this particular community. As I entered into the rehearsal process as a director, my task was to establish engagement and go deeper after holding community gatherings where we shared excerpt readings and asked the community for feedback and permission. We then spent time with elders learning about medicinal flowers that continue to grow on the land. I spent time swimming with the community in their waters. And I devised with the Blythe Festival a means to bring my actors and design team to the land each week for rehearsal. Asking each day, as Teresa Joette May asks in her article, Earth Matters, Ecology in American Theater, how has our representation of the land impacted the land? And in addition, how would it impact our bodies in the taking on the suffering that's occurred there? How do we share its pain and its healing effects? 1991. 1991 is a brief, part autobiographical retelling of what it's like to come of age in the early 90s as a victim of sexual assault in a community encased in fear. 1991 explores feminist issues surrounding consent, sexual assault, how different people define victim, and what kind of support is needed in the aftermath. The piece is set in an intimate theater, on stage, a table. At each table sits a performer, Cole Lewis, I'm sorry it's so dark, writer, director, and myself, the co-dramaturge and performer. Cole speaks the role of a child's dialogue into a microphone. Additionally, she manipulates QLab to create the sound design live on stage. At the end of the table, I sit and portray the other characters in the piece, all 11 of them. To do so, I digitally modulate my voice live to create the distinct sounds of each character. In the center of the table stand 2 performers, Mina James and Clelia Scala. They operate the 2 overhead projectors to create the images projected upstage of us onto the screen. Together, through the totality of our actions, our effort to tell this story, a movie is created live. Our first production of 1991 was presented in April 2008 at the Feminist Fuck It Festival, a 25-minute piece, and then it underwent a second phase of development in the summer of 2018. And this phase culminated in a free public sharing funded by Michael Boucher, the Director of Cultural Programs and Partnerships at Vancouver's Gold Corps for the Arts in September 2018. And we are excited to now bring it to Toronto this May 2019 as part of Riser Project's Why Not Theatre's Risers project. And we're going to expand it. Do I have one more minute? This is it. I don't know if you're seeing the connections, but I don't think I'm going to get a chance to talk about it. But apathy. Apathy. From the 1600 French apathy, from Latin apathia, from Greek apatheia, without feeling, without suffering, without. This is a performance creation devised main stage, new work as part of our theater department's 2018-2019 school year. It's in the FC complex on Loyola campus. I am directing the project with my 19 students. And this course introduces students to methods of devising new work in relationship to contemporary topics and subject matter. The theme of this devised creation piece is apathy, which stemmed out of my playwriting class last semester, where my students had to write credos about what they deeply believe, what matters to them, and things that conflict. And the big thing that came out of that writing was that they're apathetic about a lot of things, and I thought, maybe there's a play there. So this goes up at the end of March, March 27th to 30th, if you want to come see it at the FC. And we're not sure where we're putting it right now. We're asking questions like, how does apathy eat? How does it dress and undress itself? How does it talk to children? What does an apathetic community look like? We've been listening to the Brett Kavanaugh trials. We're, looking at hurricanes. We're looking at climate change, Donald Trump, our world, indigenous communities, and we're trying to figure out how we put a piece of theater together. All of these projects are devised and utilize space in different ways.
I let that one.
You let me cheat?
I did. I let that one pass, and that was because I realized after that I didn't do the territorial acknowledgement at the beginning of this, which I apologize for. It's something that I should have done. But I'd like to also say that I find sometimes the territorial acknowledgement not enough. I remember sitting with the Femmes Autochtones de Québec and listening to their stories of the residential school system, and had even 5% of that occurred to me, I wouldn't be able to even contain the rage or anger that I would feel towards that. So I apologize for that, and to all of you as well. And thank you for that wonderful talk.
So me, I have preparing this, I felt like going into a marathon because I am condensing 3 years and a half of research in 4 minutes. So at the beginning of this research, choreaptic encounters, I asked myself, how do we meet the other if we don't have access to their visible and audible body to suspend the identity? So because the visible and the eyes and the sight and aura give non-stop information about the age, about the gender, about our race, while the voice, through the language we speak and through the accent that's behind, also give a lot of information on the cultural background. And for me, who do sensory investigation, it was also a way to isolate the haptic. The haptic is the cross between touch and kinesthesia. And if we consider also the body as a space, as a mobile territory, the receptor of the haptic, they are distributed evenly on the body with no privileged location. All the other senses, they're more located toward the brain. So for do this, I choose to work with 2 dancers, and I need to make sure that they didn't know each other. So my main work was to plan the rehearsal so they don't meet one another, and then to make sure how I would also unfold each rehearsal through different experience, and how also they are safe within the space. So let's say one experience is when they had to sit and the other one was dancing around, so they had to listen to the sound of the dance. But of course, being blindfolded, what happened to the space? The Euclidean space fade out, and other space are taking over. First of all, the somatic space, but also the more fluidic space of the sound. Another experience, a lot more difficult, or that need a little bit more listening. It was giving and receiving the weight. So from there was also a real notion of the responsibility for the other that emerged. And we went like this on different experiments, and then every experiment also was documented, because me from the outside, I don't have access to the inner experience of the dancer. They recorded their voice, but also they leave a trace, they leave a visual trace by doing some drawings. those drawings, they came with me to Santa Juan in Puerto Rico, where there I had a choreographic residency, and I worked there with 5 dancers, and those drawings, they served as a movement score to create some duet and some duo that were also integrated within the choreography. One thing that I need to mention is that we were rehearsing and performing in the inner patio of a colonial architecture, of a gallery, art gallery. And just to say that the inner patio is an inner space, but it's an inner space that is outside. It's an inner space that allows privacy, but also that it's a place also that allows to meet the other one. And then in 2017, I gave a workshop in Brasilia where the participants, they were very nice. At the end, they participate to choreographic encounter. And through their feedback and testimony, it led me to Haptic Cafe, because I wanted also to share that experience with everyone. And this one, we just did it this past September here in Montreal. And the first 20 minutes, we host the participants, we lead them to the space, we wash their hands, we sit them, then we receive the other participant, we give instruction, they sit in front. Next 20 minutes, they encounter each other, they know each other through the hand contact and movement contact, and the last 20 minutes, they reveal their identity and they exchange drinking a coffee or a tea. So, and then also they left me also some testimony, and I just want to thank all those participants and the performers also that have also made me rethink the notion between performing and between experience, and have given me also the confidence to go with that experience. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Emily Saint-Hilaire.
Hello, I'm a humanities PhD student. I'm an artist, but I'm not going to talk about my own practice today. I see the future of research creation as continuing to lead innovative interdisciplinary collaborations. Bringing together art and research can be very powerful, ideally producing strong results across disciplines. I have recommendations for interdisciplinary collaborators based on my experiences learning about research creation projects over the past few years. I've seen successful and less successful collaborations as a research assistant, and I've read about many research creation projects as well. To support a strong and ambitious future for research creation and interdisciplinary collaborations generally, it's important to build frameworks that equitably value the contributions of all research team participants. So here are 3 recommendations for creating successful interdisciplinary teams. I should have thrown in a picture. I didn't. So researcher creators, meaning everyone on an interdisciplinary research creation project, should learn at least a little bit about relevant research in the arts. This might include art-based research, performance as research, artistic research, practice as research, practice-based research, research creation, etc. There's a lot out there. Research in the arts is how I refer to this collection of methods that merge artistic with other methods and disciplines, after Michael Biggs and Henrik Carlson's book, The Routledge Companion to Research in the Arts. To ignore the work of other researchers working in a similar vein goes against the spirit of research and amounts to reinventing the wheel every time artistic methodologies are brought into a project. This includes learning about the history of the artistic practices being employed. Further, research creation work should not live apart from the world of art just because it was born in an academic context. And researchers who have no artistic experience should not assume they can enter the world of enter into an art-based project without treating it like any other professional field of study. That is to say, they should learn what they can, recognize their limitations, and respect the expertise of creative professionals. 2, collaborative interdisciplinary work requires an open mind and an appreciation for difference. It can be intimidating to accept different approaches, different forms of knowledge, different perspectives. It's okay to be a beginner. Risk-taking should be approached with a dose of humility to avoid staying on a failing track longer than necessary. Failure may look very different to different members of a shared team. How well teams communicate is strongly influenced by my final recommendation, collaborative interdisciplinary research teams should form organically and take steps to prevent an epistemological hierarchy. At what point should the voice of a creative practitioner collaborator be heard? From step one, of course. They should be part of the problem formulation. What is not an organic approach is the add art and stir model, which is much more likely to produce results that succeed in one or the other community of practice. Much rarer and better is research creation work that can be celebrated across disciplinary boundaries. What really goes on once a project is underway with funding and ethics approval in place can often be a black box of emails, deadlines, and final reports, probably with a few miscommunications or perhaps worse along the way. I wrote these recommendations as a research assistant for an arts-based research project. The funder, a US-based philanthropical foundation, is hoping to fund more arts-based research projects in the future. The better the research creation project, the more of them we can have in the future. Speaking across disciplines and reaching beyond traditional venues for dissemination of research results is more important than ever. Not just to make evident the value of institutions of higher learning and art, but for the sharing of new knowledge and understanding at a time when it is needed most. Thank
you. Just before going forward, I just want to let everyone know that we're going to have an hour-long discussion after all of these talks. Yeah, that's it. Theo, welcome.
Quite terrifying to be here. So as you can see, my name is Theo. I'm a student in Master of Design program, which is a brand new program here. So I'm about to finish in a few weeks, God bless. And so we'll end the first cohort of the program. So my research was about the use of mycelium in the context of public transport. The connection might be a bit weird, even if both are behaving in the wrong. Mycelium is here on the other side. It's basically the white filamentous material that is growing in the soil and that produces mushrooms. And the reason why I've been using this material is because my research aims to find solutions to petrol-based materials in public transport, like composite materials, plastics, but also glass fibers materials. So the approach is through the use of biomaterials. Another side project I've done during the master was about the use of kombucha. You all know probably what kombucha is, so fermented tea. And this drink also produces what we call SCOBY, for symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And this SCOBY is basically pure cellulose. So we've been harvesting this material with all those kiddie pools that you can see here, which allowed us to make huge yields of SCOBY. We also mixed this material with the use of 3D printers to make patterns that will be embedded in the material in the hope for creating some sorts of structural elements digitally designed. The purpose of that, so for the mycelium, I've been able to make a full-scale model of a whole metro car. Yeah, and it was a full-scale model with all the materials with mycelium. So the seeds were cultivated with mycelium, the walls and the ceiling as well. What was interesting about that was to rethink completely the connection between the designers, makers, and the final product, and to completely reverse the kind of the paradigm of design. Instead of being afraid of the material and protecting ourselves of the material, this time we had to protect the material from us and our germs while we were working. So that was pretty interesting to completely reverse this paradigm. And so as you can see, it was kind of a success. And for the projection. So we can't really see it, but the young lady here is actually wearing a dress that is basically a huge sheet of kombucha slowly. What was interesting was to work with the materiality of this, the transparency, and the structural elements of plastic that was 3D printed. Is it already 5 minutes?
You have 30 seconds.
Oh, I'm done.
I'd like to invite Joanna Berzowska.
As you mentioned, I'm also the Associate Dean Research in the Faculty of Fine Arts, so for the last 20 minutes I've been having this discussion in my own head whether I should speak as myself or as Associate Dean, and I think I'll try to intermingle the two threads to communicate what's important to me about research creation. You've seen already a lot of really great themes come up from the other speakers around interdisciplinarity, the need for wet and messy and unusual spaces. So as ADR, one of the things I found most shocking when I came into my position last year is that only 10% of our full-time faculty actually are able to produce their work only on campus. And that is, we have more people who do some of their work on campus, but there's only 10% of full-time faculty who have the facilities they need to do their research creation on campus. The rest are forced to work off campus for a variety of reasons, and the loss of kind of intellectual richness and knowledge transfer and collaboration, to me, is immeasurable. In my own practice, I'll just segue now. In my own practice, I work with electronic textiles, and what defines research creation for me is the many different ways that we can merge different methods, not just from different disciplines, but also different methods that allow us to problematize and to question and to deconstruct the different aspects of the work that we want to do. So let's take, for example, the idea of a textile that has memory. That if our clothes suddenly not suddenly, because we're actually developing the technology, but if our clothes will or are collecting data about us, whether it's biometric data or environmental or other kinds of data, what does it mean for garments to have memory? And in my research creation practice, where I also work with different students, different spaces, we first start out by doing sketches very often. So if garments have memory and if they remember that they were touched, what kinds of stories can they tell? Stories that are sexual, stories that are about being self-conscious and feeling, well, like the clothes perhaps don't communicate what you want them to, the presence of another or the presence of your own thoughts. In order to make a lot of these things, I also collaborate with different collaborators, scientists, engineers, and for instance, a lot of the garments, a lot of the textiles I want to make need to propel or feed the development of new kinds of fibers that can create the textiles of the future, and that's my grant language, right? So how can we actually have textiles that can have that kind of memory? We need to engage the imagination and the know-how and the financing power through these collaborations with various scientists, engineers, etc., to make fibers that will be active. We then also need to work with artists and designers to teach them to imagine what form these would take. So I've been working with a lot of interns from the fashion design sphere and ask them to create garments at different moments in time, just like you would do a theatrical stage-based performance, where first this happens, then this happens. But because those fibers don't quite exist yet, well, they exist in the lab, but not in fabrics, we actually have to create different maquettes of different moments in time for the garments. And finally, I also work with students who then perhaps infiltrate or penetrate the world of, well, industry, fashion industry. So this is a project that I worked on, but also the company ended up hiring a lot of my students who are trained in these research creation practices to actually make a product. This is for Ralph Lauren. It's a biometric shirt for fitness, performance. And research creation touches on all of those things. Material explorations, conceptual explorations, engaging industry, entrepreneurship, etc. So thank you.
Sometimes I feel like my scarf gives me a nice little hug. Makes me feel safe. It really does. I wonder one day if you can actually have that feature on a coat, you know, like a hug button.
It exists for dogs too, for dogs with anxiety disorders.
I'm not that far.
Right is forward. Okay. So that's me. Hi, I'm Leslie. And I've chosen to put this up first because fundamentally I'm a performer. And that means that is my lens, in fact. That's the lens through which I use information, offer information, teach, learn, etc. So I am particularly interested in creative processes in interdisciplinary contexts. But even in that idea of interdisciplinarity, I'm really looking at contexts in which the body or its movement, in fact, remains the principal protagonist. Yeah? I'm interested specifically in my own personal research in the dramaturgy of the performer. And by that I mean everything that goes into informing the way I resonate with somebody else's proposition. Okay? From the dramaturgy of the performer, I'm also taken to a place where I'm interested in the dramaturgy of a site. I also consider the body a site. And in this idea of the dramaturgy of a site, this for me, for example, was done in the Greylands Gardens, an event that was curated by Cynthia Hammond and Shauna Johnson a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, first year I arrived. And it allows me this idea to look at, one, the relationship between body and site, and on top of that, how do we decolonize our practices? How do we decolonize our bodies as performers? How do I decolonize my own perspective as a maker, as an art maker? This is representative of my approaches to dramaturgy in performance in a larger sense. And this is a performance, you can't see it so clearly, but they're not jumping, they're on Chinese poles. So this is, I work a lot in an interdisciplinary context, dance theater, music theater, circus theater. And in this project, there are 2 circus artists, 2 dancers, and a soprano. And we work in a way that we start the process 5 months before the premiere with the set in place, and everybody improvises on that and creates through that throughout the entire period. And through that process, we are able to eliminate disciplinary boundaries. But if we didn't have the space, we couldn't do it. And then ultimately, this is just an example of me working, the work I'm doing with students, whenever it's possible. I can't imagine doing anything else but research creation, because for me, they are one and the same. I can't research if I don't create, I can't create if I don't research. And all of the students that I work with come in either through dance or circus or a theatrical practice, but really with an object of research creation as their primary tool and objective. And this is the master's thesis performance presentation of one of my students. It took place in the Black Box downstairs in Fine Arts. And Dana comes from circus, and a circus number is usually 7 minutes. And through the course of her MA, we were able to literally unpack, expose all of the reflection that went into the making of her process so she could create a performance that lasted 3.5 hours. And in a way, this for me is the perfect, it's the perfect, not just illustration, but experience of somebody who is able to actually really expose their process and enrich their own creative, tools through having access to the space and the time to do so. That's it.
Time to do so, that was like spot on.
Is that 4 minutes?
Yeah, these looks like spot on. Okay. So we're gonna go old school with a blackboard. Not in the facility. And just so we can keep in mind who we have in the room in regards to research creation and the needs that we want to focus on going forward with this idea of what we need from the facilities. And Joanna, you touched on, what was that outrageous percentage? 10%? Right. So 10%, I think we can just put that up here, that have the capacity to use the space right now for their research creation. So inevitably, space always becomes the primary, especially being in a downtown campus. So I put it to you to now bring it out and see what's being building up inside of you after listening to all of these amazing speakers.
Can I add one thing?
Please.
For me already, the reason I ended my presentation as well with an image of one of my students is because really all of my grad students are in research creation, and the reality is I'm not with them. No, I'm not. I'm just sharing with you.
Grad
And I
students.
think that, even as we think in terms of, I'm one of those faculty members that can't do what I do in the university, but it's also extremely difficult for me to do what my students want to do in the university.
I think that's absolutely correct, because there is this exchange. And I mean, as a grad student, being here at Concordia, what I'm coming for is that exchange, more than the free studio space. I could work that out in another way. But what I'm looking for is that exchange with my advisors and the teachers and the professors, and also all the other graduate students and their research and how that kind of layers together. So thank you.
Yeah, thinking further into that, all of the departments were a department of 4,000 people, and yet the feeling as a student, and I think a lot of the faculty feel that as well from who I've talked to, is that everything feels quite siloed at the moment. The painters are painting, the sculptors are sculpting, at least at the grad level, and then there's not a lot of exchange that happens, cross-disciplinary exchange.
Yeah, and we really do want to break those, and I think those silos have existed too long in every form. And I think the demand is coming. I know for myself, and just wanting to reach out to all other departments, the difficulties that lie just with that, and being in kind of like different universes too, like being in the VA. And I'm so happy that this is happening in the VA. I didn't know that was going to occur. But this kind of, there is like a real disconnect just sometimes between buildings. And this is something that we all know. It's not that I'm really just preaching to the choir here. Not like my brother, but that's myself. So, any other thoughts? Like we have the articles.
What defines the space between the silos? I mean, if there's silos where one activity requires certain kinds of tools, another requires certain kind of dance floor, another requires certain lighting, another requires, water, air. What there are, in other words, the kind of certain kinds of space that are tuned for the particular research or the particular creation. But how does one define or think about the space between? where those, you know, how does collaboration or interdisciplinary connection emerge? Maybe it's not, you know, it's something in terms of space. It's just, you know, at some point over this next process, it'll be interesting to speculate about what is the in-between. Is it all in-between?
So I don't want to talk too much because I could talk about this for the next hour. I'm trying to control myself. So we do have a new model that we're trying out with the Milieu Research Institute, where there's a couple of sort of guiding principles. One is to encourage students to co-inhabit the spaces with faculty, with technicians, so that there isn't this hierarchy of, you know, this is the research lab of the professor and this is the studio for the grad student.
Right.
To actually encourage a fluid, dynamic use of space, which I think has been very successful in terms of cross-pollinating and just giving interesting ideas to everybody involved. But there are also issues with that, not just around intellectual property, but also just, you know, we just had in our research cluster, we had a residency, and so other people were squeezed out, and it gets messy. You know, my glue gun was missing. So those are the, you know, and there's just not enough of that kind of space. But definitely allowing for both models, so one where you have some kind of stability depending on your practice, and one that is extremely fluid and collaborative. But giving that choice would be great, and we just don't have enough of either.
No, it's fair.
Maybe to build off of what Joy was saying, I think that there's some just functionality issues that create some of the silos, as you were talking about. Like we need water in this space and a floor that has flexibility in another space, things like that. Just to point out, there's also different space needs for teaching in like a specialized area versus researching in a flex space. So in a specialized teaching space, we need things to be designed for large groups to all be working at the same time. We need for things to, you know, have technical upkeep, maintenance, and things like that. And those sorts of needs, I have trouble imagining them becoming flex space research areas, right? So there is, I think, a need for different types of spaces that have different levels of functionality. And I say that as someone who absolutely believes in interdisciplinarity and collaboration, but I just want to bring up that, like, as someone who teaches, I do have different needs for my teaching space than I have for my work space.
Could I just ask, when people are speaking, if they could introduce themselves and tell us what department they're coming from, so just give us a better idea about what your requirements may be as opposed to mine.
Is everybody comfortable with that? Is everybody comfortable with identifying who you are? Or... Yeah? Okay, so sure.
And I'm talking from the perspective, I'm the head of the Fibers and Material Practices program in Studio Arts.
So when you're speaking about workspace and teaching space, and technological, are you talking about technological requirements in both?
I'm talking about, well, I'm thinking about lots of things. So I can be specific. So I teach a class called Textile Printing and Dyeing, where we need a lot of space and we have a lot of equipment and we have a lot of people and we have a lot of supplies that have different sort of health and safety risks and all these sorts of things. So like we need people to be trained in that facility in order to work in that facility so that the 200 to 300 people who come into that space know when they come, things are going to be safe and set up for them to use in the way that they need to use it. So that's a different sort of thing than, for example, what happens in my studio, where I need for things to be very flexible and responsive to sort of my project needs. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just like a different puzzle to solve in terms of space design, right?
Yeah, so there's specialized forms of making, which are clearly identifiable. So if we look at the foundry space, then we can clearly identify that as bronze, aluminum, this is what's needed, and these are the technical requirements. When you're speaking of fibers, again, it's a specific type of space. So those aren't necessarily silos as they are, rather just the space that's needed because of technical requirements. But what we're looking at right now is also, what is that other space? What is that other space that doesn't necessarily require the technological, specialized learning or training that's needed? Or perhaps there could be something that's added on to that, but we're looking for a fluid space that allows for some sort of cross-pollination and availability, right? And please add on or interrupt as I'm going forward.
The only thing I would want to add to that in terms of availability is that I think one of the things, Angelique, dance department. And I think that in terms of facilitating that space between the silos, this fluidity that you're talking about, is a creation space is a space that you can be in for a while. You don't just go in and then I leave the space and give it to somebody. You know what I mean? It's like you need to be able to hang out in it. You need to be able to sit in it. You need to be able to leave your stuff in it. Securely. Securely, exactly. If I have to go in there in the morning and haul it out at the end of the evening, that's not my creation space. And it's also then a harder, figuratively creative space to share with somebody, like as a place to meet. You know?
Does that mean like a locker space, or does it mean some other kind of system? Because then it's going to be limited to the number of lockers that exist, or...
I actually don't even think, I'm actually not even thinking in terms of locker, I'm really thinking in terms of, if I'm, that performance, I mean, okay, this is an extreme situation, sure enough, but if I even take the performance that my student did, I mean, what made it possible for her was that she spent 8 days in the black box, nobody else in there. So she could take the chalk and write all over the floor, and she could go back and look at it tomorrow and say, okay, well, do what worked, what didn't work, what do I need to get rid of, how do I try again? And if she had had to clear that space, even to put her stuff in a locker in the same room, there's no way she would have been able to dig through enough. And at the same time, even in that context, it was still possible for other people to come into the space and interact with her.
How many people?
Well, she had people come in, and there were, she had other disciplines come in, and they would watch and they would talk together, and they would, it was a place where ideas could be shared.
Yeah.
But she could spread, and then when she was done, after a week or whatever, somebody else would do the same thing.
So I've been lucky, I'm going to bring this forward, just because I think it's relative to the subject that we're talking about right now. I've been involved in the alternative in making art, making politics, and we've had the opportunity right now to be working off-site at the Canadian Pavilion. And we've been also had this type of freedom to create in this space. We've had this alternative learning space where this types of pedagogical exchange could occur from different disciplines. So what you're describing, I'm kind of experiencing and living right now on Parc Jean Drapeau, as we look at even just vacancy within the city, which is, as you know, one of the things that we're looking at incorporating and building upon in Montreal. So it could be that this fluid space may or may not necessarily have to take place on a Concordia campus, but could actually be negotiated with private stakeholders or somewhere else. I'm just throwing that out there.
Just to,
No, please.
well,
Go.
it follows a little, but just a thought. It's really hard to have space for everyone, but Emily, artist, Tuma, maybe a residency model. Signing up, having, whether it's on campus or not, but ideally, because for a comprehensive exam, I had a studio comp. I rented a studio for 2 months. I needed that. It was out of pocket. It was really expensive, but it's what I needed, and it was 2 months. So at least for that period of time, and in the PhD humanities, there are times that are more research writing, like literally writing, and there are times for materials. So
And that would be a way of also, what's the word I'm looking for? Compressing and having the space equal also. Because when you work on a residency model, then afterwards, it would help in the booking of time. But maybe there could be a space where that's not needed also, you know, where it's just kind of self-governed to some extent.
I was going to just comment on Kathleen from Art Education. Those of us who do work in collaboration with community organizations, community groups, if we are working in their spaces, we need to be able to offer them money.
Yeah.
Because it's not right to purge. So I just wanted to bring into this the idea of having flexible funding that we could apply for to do particular things for particular projects in particular community sites.
Flexible funding, no purging. I like that. Because it's true, if we have a lot of community-based organizations, I mean, they have to pay their heat, their rent, their employees, and everything else that they're doing. And we have to.
Well, it's the whole idea of reciprocity. I mean, if we're going to be there using, we need to be given. Otherwise, it's not right.
I'm a student at Fiber Engineering Practice. So I would like to describe how I see the building actually. On the one scale, we can look at the building without the artist as a production space, as a material production space, full of laboratories, which needs high control specifications, health and safety issues, and all of that. On the other hand, there is this performance that is immaterial, just to put the two on the spectrum. One of them is highly controlled, and the other one is very much of a need of an empty space to perform and to engage with people. On the other hand, students come out with full-scale models, like sort of a spatial interventions in the space itself. So we see like this intersection between the operational and the student work in the hallways. So once they come up, they can come up with a huge full-scale blown-out wall, for example, or they can negotiate with the space in the staircases or even in the bathrooms. So students are always trying to write on space or to redesign space again and again. The thing is, with research creation, it is sort of ambiguous. The term keeps being more and more ambiguous according to who is researching what and what do they need. So they don't know exactly what they're doing unless they are doing it. So the space also speaks of an ambiguity. In a sense, the schemes of how to come up with this sort of architecture or re-editing architecture becomes more of an adaptation to what is an observed program, what is absurdity in the program, what is nonsense in the program, because the difference between an architect and the artist is that the architect is very articulate in trying to make an articulate specifications of the space. Meanwhile, the artist is trying to make it more and more absurd and to take it to other levels. So I'm thinking of, if we are looking at interdisciplinarity, do we need to set the limit? Where is this interdisciplinarity is going, for example? It's not in a negative or positive connotations, but more or less this is what you described as the in-between space. It is actually what is this research creation is all about and how ambiguous it should be.
So I think that was more of a question. But how does the legality of architecture interface within the creative aspect of ambiguity of making?
You mean from a sort of safety and a code point of view? You know, how does a building maintain its kind of safe character in terms of its operation?
Are you referring to the safety or just the legality of the space, how the space is occupied? Or?
I mean, it's interesting when, just to draw on an example, and it's probably not fair to do that, but we did a building recently for Emily Carr University in Vancouver. And it's, you know, totally devoted not to performing arts, but to visual arts. But what it had were many, or what it has, are very many specific kinds of spaces. I mean, there is a place for welding, there is a place for casting metal, there are studio spaces which have huge north light. There are spaces where you can, you know, dust and carve. I mean, there are spaces that you know, pottery, there's spaces for motion capture and digital exploration. I mean, so there's lots of specificity about certain kinds of spaces.
Jessica, theater, that really resonates with me because not to compare, but when I was at FSFU working this September and Contemporary School of Arts, they're all together, and they do share a lot of different spaces. And so, you know, I was working with the theater department, but we were inside the film media studios working in the share space, the dance. You know, but I was bumping into the dance people right there. Everyone, it's a smaller school, and so I appreciate that. You know, I have to walk here and discover something. I love Concordia as well. But even the last slide that I showed, it's at the Loyola campus, and you know, it's hard to get people out there. And my students don't want to be there, and you know, even though it's this great space that we have in the evenings to ourselves, it's just this cavern on its own that there's no way to have an exchange. There's no way to pull anyone in, go come look at our work. And I wonder, even in March, you know, I had difficulty last year getting it. No one came to our directing projects even, just because of where the location was. And I'm always excited about the model where we can all be in one space, one massive building all together, with different flexible spaces where we can meet, and then places where we learn about each other's art through a specific space.
And you see the other disciplines.
Yeah.
The painter, well, I can show you go on, but I have a son who did the painting program here, and he got interested in the kind of textile section, and that now is weaving his own canvases with color and then painting over. So it was like observing other disciplines. It's just like bumping into stuff. Is sort of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and we have it at a small level by doing like dance and drama. We have our studios on the same floor, but you know, we're not Steve. No.
So,
Yeah, please.
I'm a prof in design for theatre. I'm wearing that hat tonight, not the Associate Dean Planning. I think there hasn't been I think, you know, wherever we plan on this 10-year plan, unless we have a reformation, in a sense that we allow student access to stuff that we already have, it's a waste of time, right? When I go to other schools, like Cal Arts to teach, or I'm trying to think of where else I've been recently, where the Reformation happened, right? So our students are not excluded from certain areas. You know, my set designers can't go into this building and start painting. they just can't. And there's many examples of that. We've tried in the performing arts to do more together, but I think that's not the practice going forward. We all want to be doing other stuff. My own personal practice as a set designer, you know, I use all sorts of different stuff, welding and paint and digital fabrication, and I collaborate with engineers. All that stuff happens, but that means me having to go to 10 different shops for sure. So that's my own work, but my students are trying to emulate my work, and they don't have access to any of this stuff at all. So it was fantastic that your son was able to take extra classes in fibers and discover that art form, right? But for many of my students, that's just not a possibility. The classes are full, so they don't have classes. They can't have access to the equipment. I guess I'm going back to the silos.
No, absolutely. And what you're describing is the freedom to choose.
Yeah.
And the freedom to have access to what it is that you're interested in at the moment without necessarily having to change total degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also the freedom to work in
an introverted way, private, secure space, so that you're not always in the mix of the mess. You may not be ready to be there. And if you're just wanting to go to a class to take something, the equipment that's there, you won't have access to it outside that class. So you need to have, as he's a student now, you need to have that secure working space to incubate as much as you want to be able to disseminate across the stairwells.
Well, one of the things I was going to add, I think it's just tacking on to the last two, but thinking about it not just in the space, but how we arrange the pedagogy, which I know is easier said than done, and the talk about reform has been talked about and slowly happening. I'm just thinking back to the school I did my undergrad at, which was NASCAD, I mentioned in my slides, and, excuse me, the school there was secure places for working, you know, everyone was assigned their studio. You could pick which campus, and different campuses had different needs, different studios had different advantages, and then you would pick your advisor so that maybe my advisor was such and such a person and someone else who's working right beside me has a different advisor, and maybe I'm working next to a printmaker and a sculptor. And I don't know how to rectify that with performing arts necessarily, but the cross-pollination really happened because you were in a studio-based class with a printmaker and a painter and a sculptor and a foundry person, right? Yeah,
that's why the indie and the humor are so interesting at the graduate level. Like we have nothing. Sorry, we have nothing equivalent to that at the undergraduate level, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
But if I could add to that too, I mean, all of the courses, like, you know, this year I've been teaching painting, and all of the courses are 6 credits. And then the 6 credits are spread across the year, so you can't really focus in painting to get to a point where maybe we have like in my undergrad we had 9 credit studios. So in my 3rd and 4th year I was taking 9 credits of studio every semester and 6 credits of whatever, because I was able to take 6 credit intro paint, 9 credit intermediate, that sort of thing, to really get to this point where I could work on my own things. And I find here the students are just so spread out because they're forced to take 2 or 3 6-credit studio courses over a whole year.
So Florence, and then the other 2, and then back. Okay. So just give me 1 second, Florence, so just...
That's, so I was just, you were asking about the performing art, and I was just thinking about the sound. Of course, you know, there's a musician, and then there's actor talking, and then the choreographer has his own music. Somehow, you know, that we need some kind of isolation in terms of the sound. And I understand that because it's part and it completely affects not only the creation but also the body, the way it goes. So there is private space. Sometimes there's some kind of privacy that is needed too, and also maybe sometimes asking for solitude. Sometimes after a lot of social encounter, sometimes you need, but the intense residency model, and then a more fluid space. Where there is closed space with open space, and there is open circulation. But I think for the performing arts, for sure, the sound has to be taken. So like my music doesn't disturb the student acting.
The other thing and no air travel. Those of us who are solvent sensitive, I can't even go into the printmaking studios, for instance.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, ventilation.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on that one. I'm not going to say anymore. Sorry.
My name is Elvois. I'm a part-time technician in the photo department. I also recently graduated from the photo program. So speaking of segregation between the department, I know something because I think photo is quite protective of its material because it's costly material and things where people need to be trained specifically to be used in that manner. But on the other way, I really resonate with what had been said, as if I speak a lot with the recently graduated or soon-to-be graduated students, and they feel like they have a lack of perspective in terms of career choices, which is maybe if we speak in terms of not necessarily research creations as academics, but also what can a person trained as an artist learn from,
This is a problem that comes through. Just as a grad student, I wanted to take a simple course in economics. It helped me, and it was very, very complicated. The only one that I could register was online, and then it was canceled. So that like if there was an economics entrepreneurship type of preparedness to help new starting artists understand the business aspects of even, to giving your work to a museum and a tax credit or whatever it is.
Those are, practical skills, but at the same time, those things will also rise for ourselves. Things like open new ideas and new vision and new ways of thinking about research also. So this is true multidisciplinarity, because you not necessarily engage with art, but also with other practical aspects, which are quite useful and also maybe economically advantageous on the long term. Thinking about that, but also the fact that we are in a city and most of the architecture is organized vertically, and that creates sort of blind spots as who is where. So a concrete example was we had like a project room on the photo department, and a couple of other art students had access in other departments than photo, and would build their things there for a day and then show it and have people visiting. It was like a small studio visit for the BFA because they don't have access to steady studios. And that created a lot more exchange, but then that room was given to the masters, and then it disappeared, and that exchange of people coming from other floors, other disciplines, coming up to our floor kind of stopped. So, the idea of having a space into which people can add stuff, remove stuff, document stuff, build stuff, it's just about...
I think the point that you're making about the separation between bachelor's and master's students, that it doesn't need to be there. As a master's student, I don't think it needs to be there. People could be at a different level of creative force at a different age. I mean, Concordia was founded even on this aspect of counteracting ageism, right? So I think that this idea of one degree being separated, and there should be a more, again, fluid type of space.
In Belvoir, I'm part-time in photography, but also in a lab, a post-image lab in Milieu. I'm a little bit struggling because I really don't know about this whole rethinking. What does it mean? Like, what is the scope of this? Are we going to be tearing down buildings and redoing it, or is it just, So I'm struggling. Like, what's even kind of worth saying here? But I think I live basically in EV building. So, and one big problem I found as a student, and now as a faculty, is the visibility, or the lack of. The EV building is the lack of visibility. The EV building, and especially for students, it's very intimidating. All the doors are always closed. There's big walls. You have apart from the fact that EV building looks like an office building and not an art school, it's everything is behind closed doors. And I didn't even realize how much it bothered me, but recently I visited a friend who teaches at MIT, and I'm sure some of you have been there. These labs that are all in glass, so you have students and faculty and God knows who working on all these amazing projects and all these equipment, and you can stand there and watch from the outside. And it's somehow inviting, and to me personally, it is inspiring to watch people do something that I have no idea what it is. And eventually, to be in EV building, where we have amazing labs also, all over the building as far as I know, but half of them I never stepped in because it's, the door is closed, and if I walk in, I need to have a purpose to be there, and I don't, I'm just curious, So it is, I think, but I'm not important in that equation, but students are. And the students are really, I think, intimidated, and they know their classrooms and the labs that are prescribed by the department. That's as far as it goes. So the visibility of I think it's a big issue. If anything is going to be redesigned or rethought, that's one of the things.
I'm just going to jump to Theo to go to Sarah, and then come back to Theo, and then come back to.
I'll make it short, but I've been thinking about this during the whole conversation, and I know the conversation is about research creation, but you've been talking about students and the faculty, and the staff doesn't come up. And I think that's a huge problem because people that work for fine arts are usually passionate about fine arts. I'm special projects, and I work from the dean's office, and it impacts me a lot to be like basically in an office that has no windows and like shut off from all the projects that I work on. Like unless I go around, I don't cross you guys. I see you when you're working on the projects with me. So I think that you also need to think of that because what you're doing, the work, if it's visible, it will also impact the work of other people. And like when you're working, you've been working on the summer schools, if you can't see those things, if you don't see the results of the things that you're doing, you're not moving forward. So I think, it all works together. It's an ecology. And I also think that when you have that kind of synergy, it also brings the research creation further for the artists in a way. I mean, I know, my work is a bit extraordinary, maybe it's not, but I think all the people in administration are actually making these projects happen to a certain degree, and we have to be more inclusive of that.
Just to rebound some things that have been said about the lack of visibility, I totally agree with that. And when you walk the corridors in the building, it looks like basically the university is kind of ashamed of the students. You don't see anything, but you feel like you're in a office space, or maybe worth a palliative, like end of life, hospital kind of thing. It's kind of, it is very sterile and depressing. And so when we mentioned that there was, you're Danish, right? Architect?
I'm sorry?
You're a Danish architect, right?
Danish?
No, European?
No, Canadian.
Oh, okay, never mind. Good luck. I understand that it's but yeah, I mean, it would be nice to basically rethink the space to be more human, because the EV building is more engineering building rather than fine arts building, and it's very sterile. We don't see anything. It would be nice that exhibition lasts more than just one day, and then you have to take down everything to make room for the others. It would be just nice to let things go and also you mentioned that we don't hear about the staff. I'm a staff member of the digital fabrication now. Before we do any grocery list about what we want in the future, I would like to make a huge warning sign. Don't rely too much on technologies and equipment because that won't solve everything. And it would be nice that sometimes we remind people that their hands and their head might be the first solution to the issues. We have been facing these issues since several semesters, that everyone is here, oh, I need this machine, I need this machine. Yes, can you prepare what needs to be prepared before using the machine? No, so the technician has to do the whole job instead of the students, and we are stressed. And we just deliver a bad job because we are stressed, in a hurry, and we have a waiting list.
Again, that's a question of regards to training. You have a great initiative that was started by my colleague, Brianna, called Saplings, which is trying to rectify this type of bottlenecking that occurs within the technical shops and the rest. Just wanted to...
Yeah. Picking up on, I'm Darian, sorry, I'm a humanities PhD student. And I had visited Iowa to see what their fine art department is like. And it was insane when I was there because the building had been flooded and then it was totally shut down for years. So the entire fine art department moved into an abandoned Home Depot. So it was just one huge plane, and then everything was subdivided into cubicles. And they thought that that was going to be temporary, but it ended up that they loved it because you could just walk through and there were no walls because the ceilings are 50 feet high, and just like there were no doors either. It was just all these movable walls that segregated the space for each and every fine art area. And you
So
could
it's
just walk
modular
through and
too.
see
They
everything.
can adjust it as they want.
And I could not be in that entire building because there'd be no isolation of the air.
Yeah.
So, the sound.
Yeah. The sound was awful. But they said they'd never been more collaborative.
I have a question for
Joanna.
Joey. Oh, sorry.
No, Joanna was just about to share.
Well, do you want to ask me a question?
No, you say it first.
Well, yeah, there's a few things. I think we really are quite unique, definitely in Canada, but also internationally, insofar as we do have 9 departments plus 2 additional kinds of graduate programs. And our departments, span everything from theory-based, more traditional kind of scholarship, all the way to the performing arts, through like every kind of, and different technologies, digital technologies. We also, I think, have a very strong focus on interdisciplinarity, and our new VP research, Christophe Guy, is really trying to make that even more of a focus for Concordia and a kind of unique identity for Concordia, and interdisciplinarity not just within the fine arts, but across faculties. So I think we do have a unique set of problems insofar as we have hundreds of different kinds of research creation practices. And we want to innovate even newer ones, right? And we do, just to go back to, I think, your question, innovation sometimes does require to break down walls, whether that's conceptual or literal, right? And in a building, we can't necessarily do that. But on one hand, we're asking our students and our faculty to innovate and do things that nobody's ever done before. And on the other hand, of course, there are constraints in physical space, etc. So it's quite, a unique problem, I think, to create spaces that can serve all needs. And of course, there will be some needs that will not be met. I also wanted to say, to go back to what you were saying about the MIT, did you mean the Media Lab specifically? Yeah. So, over there, there's also just a very different culture in general. And Kathleen, when you brought your project in its final stages to the Textiles and Materiality Research Cluster, and suddenly you had like 20 visitors a day, right? And you had to do 20 demos a day, or your students did. And that was amazing. But it's a very different way of working, and the Media Lab is built on demo culture. In fact, when I was a student there 20 years ago, we had these t-shirts that said demo or die, and that's actually what it's built on, right? And that's very different to what we have here. We don't have this demo culture, although we're starting a little bit, opening up spaces. So the visibility isn't just looking through a wall, but also having the sort of time to engage with each other, right? And demo culture is something to rent a theater, or you have your person, so you work here a bit, but you have your personal studio. So some of us, have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. The 10% is the percentage of those of us whose needs are completely met on campus.
Are they art historians?
No, there's some people who have their own studios. But yeah, some of us do have digital practices, whether it's text, right, or 3D animation, or things that can be done on the computer. And yeah, those spaces are smaller. So
Let me be fair, I guess. My experience at going to art schools is that my colleagues have access to stuff that I don't have access to. It's not that they're working all the time, as you say, on campus, but when they need to make something, there's the ability to be able to do that within their own, where they work.
I would say that definitely Concordia has more rules than any place I've been in terms of like, oh, this is only for undergrad, this is only for grad, this is
for research. Like I think those kinds of silos are also very problematic here. Just splitting facilities between, and I do understand that in a class you need more control than in a, in a research environment, but we have some duplication of resources, I think, as well.
Joel?
Yeah, sorry, Joel Taylor. Yeah, I guess just extending a little bit on what John was talking about, right? I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about with this is, especially in trying to think about a 10-year plan, kind of crazy thing on some levels. We're always, there's always the hard line, like I need a space for this, I need to hook up this piece of equipment, I need this ventilation, there are all these sorts of, when we start talking about needing flexible spaces and how we adapt and things like that. But like one of the things I was just thinking about is just what is the culture we are trying to create? Like what are the values we are trying to add in terms of trying to get to, like also in talking about the silos too, like, well, what are the common things that we're all trying to do? I mean, we're talking about just interdisciplinary thing, and wanting more visibility and wanting like these sorts of things. Anyways, I just adding to just thinking about this a little bit is, I think considering this kind of planning is just thinking about our common values and what culture we're trying to create, kind of will really help inform this kind of process.
Funny, because when we first moved to the EV, there was supposed to be all this cost colonization of engineers and us artsy-fartsies, and that never happened because of the way the buildings were built, for sure. But the other thing is that we don't sit well with the engineering model, and right now we have an engineering model, right, where people get funded for their labs, and they can close the doors on those labs and have their own graduate students in there, and there's no access for anybody else, right? So somehow, it's like the Borg from Star Trek. We've been infiltrated by the engineering model of research that really doesn't suit us.
Well, and just extending on that a little bit, and sort of what Theo was talking about with machines and equipment and stuff like that too, is I actually connected to that. I think sometimes with the planning, we like the specifics of what the equipment needs will happen. That like we sometimes spend way too much time thinking about that. And I'm not saying it's not important, but that's we'll get there with that stuff. I do think it's all this other kind of all these other issues that are much more important in terms of planning how we want things to sort of function in the future. Anyways.
Yeah, I was just going to add, you knew this idea of what kind of culture you want to actually create. And when you're talking about the performing artists here in the journals, each person visiting, I'll just tell one little anecdote that for me speaks mountains. When there's for those who don't know, dance studios on the 7th floor, fitness studios on the 7th floor, music on the 8th. We're sandwiched in between other activities. And when you get into the elevator to go up to the performing arts floors, there's a little sign, and sometimes it's a dancer, sometimes it's a musician, sometimes it's an actor. And it's an advertisement for graduate certificates in entrepreneurship or something. And the caption says, with a picture of the artist, turn your passion into profit. So there we are. I mean, for me, when I walk into that elevator, I'm slightly sickened. In terms of the culture that I, and how do I then say to my students, young undergrads, listen, just let go of that and, dig, search, want to share, it's much more complicated.
So, I just want to say something which might help, it might not, but either way I'm going to say it. So, I deal with different forms of disaffiliation. And people that experience disaffiliation, and as everyone is speaking to me about time, space, location, and everything that's happening, the breakdown on how something happens or becomes disaffiliated, or a person becomes disaffiliated from society, usually happens because of the loss of time, and it can be broken down very much in this way. And then space, relations, and then the body. So when someone enters into a state of disaffiliation, they lose sense of time, they lose sense of space, they lose sense of relations, the people that are surrounding them, and then eventually their own body. So if we think of Concordia as a community or as one giant body, or when we're talking about breaking the silos and all of these different types of things and creating a social sculpture, what I keep on hearing throughout everything that everyone is saying is time-space relations of the body, of visibility. When you're talking about breaking boundaries, also needs or restrictions in regards to sound, quiet spaces. Again, all of these things that we're talking about is the senses, right? So the need to have modular or fluid spaces that adapt to the different needs of the senses of every different type of art practice. That's a mouthful, eh? Yeah. But I think it kind of like speaks to this feeling of coming together as a community and as a group and breaking this type of disaffiliation, which I think is, when you're speaking about Joel, when you mentioned culture and values, I think that that is something that we all want in Concordia.
I just asked a question. In terms of this planning, how is this planning affected by the fact that EV building, with its specificity, it's basically a public building, access to metro, all these rules and regulations in terms of access on Sundays, on week long, does this affect this whole big thinking, or are we even more restricted to create a space that you think it should be based on this fact? Or because it's not the same VA building and EV building, right? Because EV building has all sets of new rules and regulations.
I don't think so. The graduate students got 24/7 in this building because it was requested and granted many years ago, right, on the 4th floor here. The university is officially open from 7 to 11, but any graduate student can get access 24/7 to their stuff. The restrictions are on the undergraduates, yes, but with hall passes, my students stay in the studio that I teach in all night long if they need to finish a project. It's not, the rules can be broken.
I understood, yeah, I hope so, but I understood that we are very restricted what we can do in all these building because of this,
Yeah. It's not as restrictive as you're probably imagining, I don't think. This undergraduate students that I teach have access to what they need when they need it at the time that they want it, to the studios. Is that what you're asking?
No, I just, for some reason, I heard that AV building, because it's access to metro and the streets on 4 sides and whatever, that there are certain regulations in terms of.
But if you register your student, if you teach in that building and you register your students with security, and they have a valid Concordia thing, they can stay in the studio that they want in. Absolutely.
Sarah had something to add.
I'm not sure, but I'm thinking that maybe there's always a way to work to make things more flexible, right? So I think instead of thinking of the specificity of each building, but recognizing that maybe there's a need that's not being met because there's a regulation that's blocking it, I think those are things that are important. Because if we hear from everyone the same thing, then that's the way you change that rule, right? You said basically this isn't working on a global level and we need to find a way to fix that problem. So I think that goes beyond what you can do in EV and what you can do in EV.
So I'm going to say something though that it may not be apparent, just coming from the sculpture department, and speaking on behalf of students, to have access to certain types of tools after hours. Not life-ending tools, but again, just basic tools. And this is something that, it's one thing for them to have access to the space, but without them having the tools to be able to use in that space, that kind of it defeats the purpose also. So what that requires in regards to security or making rounds or being vigilant so that if someone is working in a space and they're injured, that they can receive the medical treatment that they need. So every photography has its own needs, sculpture has its own. So it's dependent upon whichever faculty you're from or discipline. But we want to break those as well. Because sometimes if somebody just needs a drill. Sorry to be so simplistic. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet that needs to speak? I just want to make sure everyone has the chance, and that because my head wasn't turned in that direction, I missed you in some way. Where's Chris?
Yeah. Okay. I just want to say something about that. Chris had to step out of his class to do his presentation, and the timing, I put him at the end last minute. So I just want to apologize to Chris on this video and to all of you that you didn't get to see his presentation, and I'll be following up with him after.
I bellowed his name.
No, because also the last faculty council we were asked to do a brainstorming, and I'm just coming back also to the idea of if you have an learning space, because they come also with maybe a space that has an activity during 1 month, but then the next month it's a completely different activity. Of course, when you don't need too much equipment, of course, us, we don't need that much equipment, we just need a work body and work. So at that's one thing. But also, when we're talking also about space outside of the university, there is a lot that are visible. Of course, there is a need to rent, but they are visible. There's window, people can pass and can see, and people doesn't need also a lot of equipment. They can go work, and you just put Concordia University research, whatever. So also people in the street, they have access also. Because sometimes people, we were talking the other day also about social restriction, that some people sometimes they would never come within the university because they don't feel happiness. Then your summer school, yeah, okay, because you know what, it just reminded me that because we were talking about space, also I looked at, I did a little research to look at daycare, if university offer daycare. And there are 2 daycare that are very small, they're completely outside and separate also the university, and everything is a bit very on the list. So I just want to say also, if we think about space, of course we're thinking about the final faculty, but I think also to integrate the future somehow, to integrate something different also, and then they can also see or contact it, whatever. So
did you get the survey?
What?
Did you get the survey? Helen, our director of administration, who's on leave, is doing a feasibility study for youth programming, summer youth programming. So it's like a kids camp, basically. Yeah, it's in fine arts. Yeah.
Okay, so I believe we've reached
We have about 5 minutes left.
5 minutes for any final thoughts.
Super short final thought. It would be really cool to have also a residency spot for people from other disciplines or schools or like other scholars who could spend time in the art space and as a collaborative. It's just an idea.
And if we're not.
So over in there?
Yes, sure. Exchange it
So essentially, because every department, as I understand it right now, has the ability to bring in someone, an artist in residence, right? So what you're asking is for a space, for there to be this exchange as well, with whoever's in residency. And that would be implied within the aspect of how they're brought in, that they would have to disseminate information or have this type of interaction.
I was just saying, I'm not sure how to say this, it's not articulated bad, just because I'm with the Indigenous Directions leadership group as well, and like a conversation about values and things just makes me think about, how do we invite Indigenous artists and scholars into our spaces, and part of it is is that visibility is really important, because if Indigenous people don't, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but the communities that I work in, a lot of the conversations around, I don't see myself there, I'm not going to come. also that long-term relationships is at the core of the values in terms of how we invite people in to our spaces. And again, when things are closed, or if there isn't a space for like a guest artist to display themselves, if I were inviting indigenous guest artists to work with me, and they're just, all they have is this little tiny office space to work in, and then they go to their classroom on the 7th floor and that's it, then I know for myself that's not actually it's not an indigenous lens of way of working. Is to work in private, or to work because it's about community. Often that way of working is about sharing. So I'm probably saying that, but I'm just thinking about it as the group itself is trying to formulate how do we talk about the university getting out of the way, or getting out of its own way to allow even more relationship building to happen.
I think what you're saying is really important, and I've had the privilege of being able to teach the grad reserve class in Sculpture 210, and I've been in contact with Charmaine Lynn, and I've just received the okay this week so I can bring in 2 Inuit carvers to my sculpture class. So that's another way of just making space and just like, but that's functioning. So I'm really happy that that's going to happen. Because I've had that experience, but not necessarily everyone else has. So if we could bring in outside knowledge holders and then just get out of the way, essentially.
Why do you have to go through Charmaine?
No, it just happened in that sequence of events. I didn't have to. No, I didn't. Okay, so no, listen. I went to speak to Charmaine about something else.
Oh, okay.
Just
you
were
fine. Could be walking to your class.
No, I did. I understand that. But I wanted to invite them with funding. And I'm just saying that.
It's all good. It's okay. We'll talk about it another day.
I was just going to say that on that note, though, that we have artists that having a space where smudging can happen, and where it's not like just hiding in the office. We have a resource center and feeling like we're being delivered because we want to smudge in our space. Making that available for there's no protocol on this university in terms of how smudging happens, and it's a huge place for indigenous people to be able to, the nation, the people of nations who do smudge, and have that visibility where you're not having social security guards and say, what's that weird smell? Or, here's again, what we got to call fire trucks. I think that's another thing to think about in terms of space, in terms of creation space, or even a space where you invite indigenous artists.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a beautiful way actually to end the conversation, in that with such an important note for some of us to think about as we leave and creating these spaces for even sludging to occur. Because this is something that I keep on hearing, keeps on coming up. And I know the importance of it, especially when we come to this declaration that we're saying at the beginning of every event. If we can't follow through in a practical way, it's not enough. It's hollow. It's not enough.
So again, I just want to apologize to Chris, but also to thank all of the presenters who came tonight. Thank you guys for taking your time and for showing us your research. Just a round of applause.